Well, today we're going to be looking at a chapter. We know what happened right before was that David defeated Goliath. And so we're going to kind of approach this, just visualize as if it was kind of a cartoon. So we have this hero, this unlikely hero that just defeated a giant, and everyone's, hooray, hooray, we love David, he's great. Even the king rejoices over the fact that he just defeated this giant, this Philistine giant. And what's funny is that this would normally be the point in the story when the narrator says, and they lived happily ever after. But we also know that every good story has sort of a villain and antagonist, and they're usually wearing dark clothes, they lurk around in the corners, and they try to do away with the hero of the story. And people who write stories that like a good plot twist will often make the villain someone who's also unexpected, just like the hero. So today we're going to kind of look at this chapter, and we're going to see the hero. We already know who the hero is. We're going to see who the villain is, how he became this villain, and what that means for us, what we can learn from the characters as we go through the verses of this chapter. So let's open up our Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 18 and see what we find. So first of all, what's going on here in Israel, just real quick, we know that there's some Israelite-Philistine conflict, some issues there. We know that Yahweh is Lord over Israel, but he's choosing humans to kind of do that for him, which is risky, and we'll see. But and then there are also two anointed ones here, because although Saul has been rejected, and we've talked about that in previous sermons, we also know that he is the king still, and David has been anointed as the king. So let's read these first few verses. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow and his belt. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. So here's our first character. We see Jonathan. What do we know about him so far? He is Saul's son. He is the heir to the throne, technically. And he really loves David. They make that pretty clear. The word knit here that's used in the ESV translation basically just means tied or bound. There's a connection between them. We can kind of see a few different things going on here. This connection could be a spiritual connection where Jonathan just saw what David just did right in the verses before and said, wow, he really trusted God. He did something brave and valiant. And I really admire that. I want to do that as well. And it could also be sort of a political love, which some people think kind of takes away from that love, but I think it actually enhances it, because we see that Jonathan's actions later on really help David get to where he needs to be. So either way, there's this connection between Jonathan and David, and the word love is used here. I would suggest that what is really connecting them here is they both have this trust in Yahweh. They are both loyal to him, and because of that, they can be connected in such a way. Now, we also see Saul here in these little chunks of verses, and he's perfectly happy with David right now. He's pretty excited. He gave him a high rank and everything like that, and all's good, happily ever after, right? We will see. So we're going to keep moving along. And remember, kind of some of the other translations, just before we move on, say that this was good in everyone's sight. Now remember that word sight, because that kind of comes about later on. This is my favorite part of the chapter, so let's pay special attention here. We're going to start kind of in verse 6. They were coming home, and the women came out of all the cities singing and dancing, and with tambourines, songs of joy, musical instruments, and they sang to one another as they celebrated that Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry. This is interesting. Some people suggest that these women were actually like professional celebrators, which sounds really funny, but kind of in the like Ugarit sense, there were there were professional wailers. When something really tragic would happen, they'd go out in the streets really loud and wail and be grieved, and all that stuff kind of set the tone for the people. If it was the same way, either way, the instruments that these women used were very common in celebrating things. There's nothing really abnormal about what just happened in this text. This song is hilarious because it's like the worst song ever written. I remember always thinking that in Sunday school because there's no real tempo to it. It doesn't look like a real song. They rhyme thousands with thousands. It just doesn't work by our standards. But this was what's called like a poetic couplet. And the terminology there, thousands and 10,000s, was very commonly used to just say a lot of, just a lot. So in Hebrew poetry and in Ugaritic poetry, they have a poem that's about a god. He's the goldsmith god, kind of, and his name is Kothar. And the poem goes a little something like this. He casts silver by the thousands, gold he has cast by the 10,000s. And this poem was understood to say that there was not necessarily more gold than there was silver, there was just lots of gold and silver. And the god Kothar was just very generous with his precious metals. And this was the way that the people understood this, and this word pairing of thousands and 10,000s. These poor women didn't mean to offend the king. They were just trying to give him a compliment, Hey, yay, everyone, they both slayed a lot of people. But Saul was very angry, and this displeased him. And from that day on, he eyed David. Now this word eyed is very interesting because it's kind of the verb form of a word that just kind of means eye. And this is the only time in, I believe it's in post-biblical Hebrew that that this word is used in this way. It kind of is translated as looked at carefully, and almost the sense of an evil eye. He gave him the evil eye. And the first thing I think of is, I don't know if you've seen Emperor's New Groove, but there's this part where Yzma's eye is like just there. That's just her eye, and it's really creepy looking. She has like 3 long eyelashes, and that's kind of what the evil eye looks like to me. But either way, Saul was not happy with David from this point on. There may have been some insecurity issues there with Saul because the Lord had departed from him. He wasn't successful anymore. David was successful now, and everyone loved David. Now, as we talked about in the last section that Andrew talked about, Saul promised his daughter to whoever could defeat this guy, right? And he kind of turned his back on that because now that he hates David, he's envious of him. He doesn't want him any closer to the throne than he already is, right? So he gives his daughter away to a man named Adriel instead. And this is interesting. I learned that kind of chapters and chapters later, you find out that Merab gave Adriel like 5 sons, and they were all killed by the Gibeonites later on in their lives. And those people who are really interested in the kind of the structure of stories and of folklore and mythology and stuff definitely see this as sort of like, well, yeah, because you didn't even consider who you were giving her to. You just gave her for the sake of that. It was kind of fate, if you will. Now, we don't have to look at it with a mythological sort of standpoint because that's not how we're viewing the story. We're not viewing it as a myth. But you kind of see there that Saul doesn't even really care about the decisions that he makes for his family anymore. He's not loyal to his family. And further on, we see that Michal, Saul's other daughter, loves David. And this pleases Saul. Not because his daughter's in love, not because he wants a son-in-law, but because he sees this as another opportunity where maybe David could be killed. You kind of see him like wringing his hands a little bit. Like, yes. He tried to kill David himself with his spear. I don't know how David managed to evade that. I don't know if he's some sort of ninja or something. He's super quick. He could be. But But anyways, Saul sees this as another opportunity for David to be killed so that he can't be the king, because now Saul wants to be the king. Now this is pretty interesting. There's some good wording here. Can't find what the verse number is, but Saul actually fears David. The ESV uses the word fear of David. And maybe because he's becoming closer and closer to the throne. I don't know. But it's interesting, the contrast between the love of everyone in this passage. Jonathan loves David. The Israelites and all of Judah loves David. Saul's servants love David. Saul's daughter loves David. And Saul fears David. We'll come back to that a little bit in our application of this whole thing. But we'll look at David's response when he sees that he has another opportunity to become the king's son-in-law. He says, "Is it a small matter to become the king's son-in-law when I'm from such a family? I don't have much of a reputation. I'm poor." This is interesting because the typical way of receiving a bride was to give the father a bride price. And David knows that he can't pay a bride price. He's not from a rich family. And this is a royal woman. So Saul pretends to be all nice, saying, "Oh, don't worry about the money. All I really want is 100 Philistine foreskins. Just go ahead and go out and get him." It's a weird request, I know, but the point is he wants him to go into battle, once again, risk his life so that he will be killed. And so, that's what David did. He went out with a bunch of men, and he brought back all the foreskins that Saul asked for. And some believe that he gave more than he even needed to. He brought back 200 foreskins, and that just actually goes to show David's character a little bit. That the character of David, he's so successful. That's how he's presented. The Lord is with him so much that he's so successful. Now, did David ever do anything purposely to make Saul angry and jealous? No, not on purpose. In fact, we don't really learn much from David, especially in this passage. We don't know what he's feeling about all these things. He doesn't say a whole lot here. Everyone else in the passage is talking about David and talking to David, but David isn't really saying much. So, what we know is that everyone loves him. We don't know if he necessarily loves them back. I don't know if that's important at this point. But Saul, who hates him, wants him dead, and has shown in this passage, Saul's actions, that he will take advantage of the love of his daughter. He will put his own men at risk to see David killed. All because why? He's jealous of him. He doesn't want him coming and taking his place. This shows a real disloyalty that Saul has to his family. And to his people, his country. He's still the king. And disloyalty to David. But David, on the other hand, probably honestly could have fought Saul back. When he threw his spear at him, David killed Goliath. Why couldn't he kill Saul as well? Because David will not raise a hand against Yahweh's anointed. David's able to be loyal to Saul even when Saul is nowhere near loyal to David. And why is it that how is it that Saul became this antagonist, this tortured character that we see here who is not happy with anything or anyone? Because as Mary mentioned many chapters back, Saul disobeyed God. And God, the Spirit of the Lord, departed from Saul. And because of that, Saul's no longer loyal to Yahweh. He's no longer loyal to the Lord. And that's giving him problems in being loyal to those people around him as well. And we can really learn from this. Because there may be people in your life, your friend gets a promotion at work and you don't. You can't be happy for them. I'm kind of scared to say how much of myself I can see in Saul sometimes. And the ability to be jealous of people. And to not be loyal to them. And there may be some people in your life who are not loyal to you, but only by God's strength, by God's Spirit, can you make that stand and say, you know what, I'm going to be loyal to them anyway, because I'm loyal to Yahweh and that's what He wants me to do. So I challenge you in this next few moments to ponder that and think about that and how you can further your loyalty to God and those around you. Thank you.